The heart monitor unleashed a piercing, unbroken shriek. Dark, crimson blood spread across the linoleum of Trauma Bay 1, seeping through the hem of Nurse Hannah Hastings' blue scrubs. She knew exactly what needed to be done. She had seen this blast pattern dozens of times before. But Dr. Richard Harris thrust his palm hard against her shoulder, slamming her back into the metal crash cart. "Know your place, nurse," he barked, sweat already beading on his forehead. "Hand me the clamps and keep your mouth shut." Hannah braced herself, watching him prepare to make the fatal incision. Then, a blood-soaked, battle-worn hand shot up from the gurney, gripping the doctor's wrist with bone-crushing force. The dying captain forced his eyes open, locked them onto Harris, and rasped, "Step away, doctor!" She gives the orders. Seattle Presbyterian Hospital carried the smell of contradiction, the harsh, sterile bite of industrial bleach fighting a losing battle against the dense, metallic weight of human suffering. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of night where rain drove itself against the pavement on a vicious wind rolling off Puget Sound. Inside the emergency department, chaos moved like a disciplined ballet of trauma and triage. And the entirely uncredited choreographer of that ballet was Nurse Hannah Hastings. Hannah was 34, with tired green eyes and dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun. To the revolving door of arrogant young residents, she was just another pair of hands, someone to fetch the iodine, push the IV fluids, and clean up after the doctors had performed their miracles. But those who paid real attention knew the truth. Hannah was the invisible backbone of the trauma ward. Before Seattle, there had been Kandahar. Before the faded blue scrubs, there had been Kevlar and the deafening roar of medevac choppers over hostile territory. Hannah had spent 6 years as a combat trauma nurse, holding shattered bodies together under enemy fire. She had witnessed more blood before her 25th birthday than most civilian surgeons see in a lifetime. But a deeply classified incident during her final tour, one that left a jagged scar across her collarbone and a deep contempt for institutional politics, had driven her into civilian anonymity. She didn't want recognition. She just wanted to save lives. Unfortunately, recognition was being monopolized by Dr. Richard Harris. Dr. Harris was the newly appointed chief of trauma, a man whose ego arrived 5 seconds before he did. His resume was staggering. His smile was flawless. His ability to handle real, unscripted chaos was catastrophically absent. He viewed nurses not as colleagues, but as equipment, instruments to be used, silenced, and discarded. And Hannah's combat-forged instincts whispered a quiet warning. Harris was a slow-burning fuse, and eventually the wrong patient was going to pay for his pride. She just hadn't known that moment was already hurtling toward them through the storm at 70 miles per hour. The overhead intercom crackled sharply. Code yellow. All trauma personnel to Bay 1. Incoming VIP. ETA 3 minutes. Harris immediately squared his shoulders. Clear Bay 1. Massive transfusion protocol on standby. I will be taking primary command of this case. Hannah moved to the bay and began working with mechanical precision, checking laryngoscopes, priming IV lines, laying out chest tube kits. As she worked, the radio transmission crackled through. The voice belonged to her friend, paramedic David Carter. Seattle Pres, this is Rescue 4. Patient is Captain Donald Sterling. Repeat, Captain Donald Sterling. Industrial explosion at the harbor docks. Primary blast injuries? Severe shrapnel to the chest and abdomen. BP 70/40 and falling. He's fading fast. The name detonated through the room like a shockwave. Captain Donald Sterling was not simply a VIP. He was a legend. A decorated former Navy SEAL commander who had transitioned into leading an elite disaster response unit. The man the governor called when every other option had failed. For the city, he was a hero forged in iron. For Hannah, he was a ghost. A memory she had locked behind reinforced doors in her mind 5 years ago. Not since Kandahar. Her hands paused over the sterile tray. A single painful beat skipped through her chest. Hastings, Harris snapped. O negative blood. Hanging now. Hannah blinked, buried the memory, and moved. Hanging now, doctor. The bay doors blew open violently. Paramedic David Carter pushed through with frantic energy, the gurney rattling across the threshold in a tangle of wires and blood-soaked dressings. Captain Donald Sterling, 52, David shouted. Blast drove shrapnel through his Kevlar. Abdominal wound is blowing through the packing. Severe hypovolemic shock. 2 liters of crystalloids. No response. They transferred the captain onto the trauma bed on the count of 3. Hannah's scissors were already working through the remnants of his tactical gear. When she peeled the fabric back, the room went momentarily silent. The right side of his chest and abdomen was devastated. Jagged metal fragments protruding from torn flesh, skin ash pale and slick with sweat and soot. For the first time since Hannah had known him, Dr. Richard Harris looked completely paralyzed. Doctor, Hannah said sharply. Pressure is tanking. 60/30. Harris jolted back into motion. Hang another liter of saline and push epi. Hannah's hands froze. With uncontrolled internal hemorrhage from a blast injury, aggressive fluids will destroy whatever clots he's formed and dilute his clotting factors. Epinephrine will mask the true blood loss. We need massive transfusion protocol with whole blood and a surgeon in this bay right now. Harris spun around, eyes wide with fury. I did not ask for a consultation, nurse. I am the chief of trauma. Push the fluids, push the epi. Do it now, or I will have your license stripped and security walking you out. The room froze. Hannah looked down at Captain Sterling. His face had turned slightly toward her. Through the blood and the grime, she saw the faint trident tattoo on his forearm. She closed her eyes for a single breath. Then she made the decision she knew would end her civilian career. No. Her voice was not a shout. It was low, measured, and carried the absolute authority of someone who had commanded life and death in a war zone. Harris stared as though she'd struck him. What did you just say to me? I said no, Hannah repeated, stepping physically between him and the IV line. I will not watch this patient die to protect your ego. She turned across the bay. Sam, MTP cooler. Spike the O negative, uncross-matched. We're done with the saline. Harris lunged, grabbing her shoulder. In the same instant, the monitors erupted. Pressure crashing! 40 overpalp! Sam yelled. Harris shoved her hard into the counter. Look what you've done! You're killing him! He grabbed the ultrasound probe, smearing gel frantically across the captain's chest. Massive hemothorax. Give me a chest tube, 36 French, scalpel, Kelly clamps. Right side now. Hannah regained her footing and her eyes moved instantly to the captain's neck. The jugular veins, bulging, engorged, straining like blue cables beneath the skin. On the monitor, the QRS complexes were shrinking with each beat. Electrical alternans. The hallmark signature. This was not a hemothorax. Dr. Harris stopped. She lunged forward. Look at his neck veins. Look at the EKG. It's cardiac tamponade. The blast caused hemorrhage into the pericardial sac. His heart is being crushed. If you breach the pleural space, he arrests instantly. Shut up! Harris screamed, scalpel raised. Step away from this table, or I will have you arrested for assault. He brought the scalpel down. Hannah didn't think. She reacted. Pure muscle memory forged beneath a Kandahar sky. Her hand shot out and locked around Harris's wrist. The scalpel stopped less than an inch from the captain's skin. Let go of me, Harris snarled, wrenching his arm. Hannah redirected his force with a sharp twist and sent the scalpel clattering onto the tray. You arrogant fool, she said, her voice dropping to something quiet and lethal. That incision kills him in 10 seconds. You're reading a mirror artifact on that ultrasound. Your depth settings are wrong for this presentation. His heart is drowning. He needs a pericardiocentesis, not a chest tube. Security, Harris bellowed. Remove this woman, now. 2 guards burst in, visibly confused. Dr. Amelia Brooks, a first-year surgical resident, had just slipped into the bay. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the captain's neck. The blood drained from her face. Dr. Harris, she whispered. She's right. It's tamponade. Shut up, Brooks, Harris snapped. Guards, remove her. They stepped forward toward Hannah. She held her ground. She was not leaving this man on this table. Then Captain Donald Sterling moved. Through the crushing pressure, strangling his heart, through the hemorrhagic shock stealing his consciousness, the survival instincts of a man forged across decades of covert warfare roared to life. His left arm whipped upward. His blood-soaked hand bypassed Hannah entirely and closed around the collar of Harris's white coat. With a surge of adrenaline that defied every principle of hemorrhagic shock, the dying captain hauled the doctor's face to within inches of his own. Harris let out a strangled yelp. Sterling's eyes, previously glazed and rolling, snapped into sharp, lethal focus. He looked at Harris, then shifted his gaze to the nurse holding the doctor's wrist. Recognition crossed his face, profound, absolute, and fiercely guarded. He coughed, a wet, terrible sound. Blood flecked his lips. Then, in a voice like gravel across steel, ragged but carrying the irreducible weight of command, Captain Sterling spoke. Step away, doctor. Captain, this nurse has lost her mind. Sterling's grip tightened briefly, cutting off Harris's air. His gaze moved to Hannah. I know her. The words cost him everything. The monitors screamed. Kandahar, 2021. The Reaper's Shadow. Hannah's breath stopped. Nobody in the civilian world knew that name. It was the call sign the SEAL teams had given the ghost medic who had pulled 6 of their men back from death after a catastrophic ambush, a nurse who, due to the Black Ops classification of the mission, had officially never existed. Sterling's grip went slack. His arm dropped. His eyes closed. The monitor flatlined. One long, unbroken tone filled the room. Harris stumbled backward and crashed to the floor, staring at the screen. His ego shattered. He was frozen. Hannah didn't waste a second. Amelia, get over here. Right now, you are my hands. I will walk you through every step. We have less than 60 seconds. Dr. Brooks crossed the bay in 4 strides. What do I do? Spinal needle, 18 gauge, 20 cc syringe. Hannah was already splashing betadine across the captain's sternum. Subxiphoid approach. 45-degree angle toward the left shoulder. You're targeting the pericardial sac. From the floor, Harris raised his voice. You're both going to prison. This is murder. Hannah glanced at the guards. Remove him. The guards, recognizing raw authority when they heard it, dragged the protesting chief of trauma out of the bay. Needle is in, Amelia whispered. I'm advancing. Watch the EKG, Sam. Call any PVC. Hitting resistance, Amelia said, voice pulled tight. Push through, slow and steady. A subtle pop, felt more than heard. Amelia pulled back on the plunger. Thick, dark, non-clotting blood flooded the syringe. I'm in. I've got blood. Drain it. All of it. As 50 milliliters of blood were drawn from the sac surrounding his heart, the flat line flickered, then broke. Beep, beep, beep. A rhythm returned to the screen. We have a pulse. Sam's voice cracked with disbelief. Pressure rebounding. 80 over 50, 90 over 60. Hannah let out a long, shaking breath. She looked down at the unconscious captain. He had saved her career. She had just saved his life. But as the adrenaline receded, cold certainty settled in her stomach. Sterling knew who she was. He knew about Kandahar, about the classified mission, about the real reason she had disappeared into civilian life. If he survived, the ghosts of her past were going to come crashing into her present. And Dr. Harris was going to try to bury her for what had just happened in this room. The battle for the captain's life was won. The real war had only just begun. The boardroom on the 7th floor felt light years removed from the ER below. Less than 12 hours after Trauma Bay 1, and this was where careers went to die. Not from scalpels, but from fountain pens and non-disclosure agreements. Nurse Hannah Hastings sat with her spine rigid in an expensive leather chair, still wearing the scrubs bearing Captain Sterling's dried blood. She hadn't slept. Across the mahogany table, Dr. Richard Harris in a fresh white coat, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Gregory Vance, and the hospital's lead legal counsel, Sarah Jenkins. This hearing concerns the events of October 24th, Jenkins began crisply. The charges, gross insubordination, physical assault of a superior, and unauthorized practice of medicine. I saved his life, Hannah stated. Dr. Harris misdiagnosed the patient. He was about to insert a chest tube for a hemothorax that didn't exist. The ultrasound showed a mirror artifact from the subcutaneous emphysema. Captain Sterling was in cardiac tamponade. Had Dr. Harris made that incision, the patient would have arrested immediately. Harris slammed his palm on the table. That is an absolute fabrication. I am a board-certified trauma surgeon. This nurse cracked under pressure, assaulted a senior physician, and forced a first-year resident into a reckless cowboy procedure that was entirely unwarranted. Unwarranted? Hannah's green eyes locked on him. Dr. Brooks aspirated 50 cubic centimeters of non-clotting blood directly from the pericardial sac. His pressure rebounded instantly. That is documented fact, Dr. Harris. Jenkins shuffled her papers. Actually, Ms. Hastings, the documentation is the problem. The operative note lists a self-resolved hemothorax as the primary diagnosis. The ultrasound machine's local memory has been cleared. There are no images to support your claim. The air left Hannah's body. She looked at Harris. The quiet satisfaction in his eyes confirmed everything. He had gotten to Amelia. He had wiped the machine. You deleted the imaging, Hannah said quietly. And you threatened Dr. Brooks. Harris leaned forward with a thin smile. Defamation carries serious consequences. You're already looking at termination and a complaint to the nursing board. Don't add a civil lawsuit. Dr. Vance sighed. Effective immediately, Ms. Hastings, you are suspended without pay pending formal termination. Security will escort you out. Hannah rose slowly. The injustice threatened to crush her, but the discipline built in Kandahar kept her spine rigid. She didn't plead. She looked directly at Harris. You are a coward, Richard. You care more about your reputation than the people bleeding on your table. Take my badge. But you and I both know what happened in that room. And eventually, your arrogance is going to put someone in a body bag. She turned for the door, then paused. One more thing, Dr. Vance. Hold off on the press release celebrating Dr. Harris's heroic performance. Because when Captain Sterling wakes up, he's going to have a very different version of events. Harris scoffed. The man was practically brain dead. He won't remember a thing. We'll see, Hannah said and walked out. The surgical ICU was glass, steel, and the rhythm of ventilators. 2 uniformed police officers stood outside room 412. Hannah's security escort stopped at the nurse's station. She turned to Frank, the older guard who had known her for years. 5 minutes, Frank. I just need to see him. Frank studied her exhausted eyes. 5 minutes. I'll tell them you're doing a handover briefing. But if Harris shows up, thank you. She slipped inside. Sterling looked smaller, surrounded by machinery, though somehow still formidable. The breathing tube had been removed. The monitor beside him beeped with a strong, steady rhythm, a sound more beautiful to Hannah than anything she could name. She stood at the foot of the bed, confirming he was alive, then turned to leave. A hoarse voice broke the quiet. You always were a hard woman to find. She turned back. Sterling's eyes were open, bloodshot, heavy with painkillers, but alert in the way only a man who had spent his life reading danger could manage. Captain, you shouldn't be talking. Quiet, Hastings. A faint shadow of a smile. I give the orders. Something tightened in her throat. Yes, sir. Kandahar, Korangal Valley extraction. He drew a careful breath. My team was shredded. 3 men down, arterial bleeds. Medevac was delayed. They sent in a Black Ops surgical asset. He paused. They called you the Reaper's Shadow, because wherever death moved, you were already there pulling his targets back. That file carries heavy classification, Captain. I never forget a face. His voice was dry gravel. Especially not the one belonging to the woman who held her fingers in my point man's femoral artery for 2 hours while the compound came down around us. He looked at her steadily. I knew exactly who I was looking at the moment I saw you grip that doctor's wrist. Hannah exhaled. I left the military because of the politics. Command deciding who lived or died based on mission parameters instead of medical need. I came to Seattle to disappear, to just be a nurse. And instead you ran into Richard Harris. He was going to kill you, she said simply. I had to stop him. And now he's making you pay for it. The glass door swept open. Dr. Richard Harris came through it like a man who had already written the ending. Behind him, Chief Administrator Kensington, Dr. Vance, and both security guards. I knew it, Harris said, finger leveled at Hannah with theatrical satisfaction. She's trespassing. Remove her and call the police. He turned to the bed, composing his face into something resembling warmth. Captain Sterling, I apologize for this intrusion. I am Dr. Harris, the Chief of Trauma. I oversaw your care last night. You're safe. Captain Donald Sterling did not smile. He regarded Harris with the flat detachment of a predator assessing something loud and ineffectual. Then he reached up and pressed the red emergency call button on his bedside console, holding it until a continuous alarm rang out at the nurse's station. Cancel that, Harris ordered the nurse who appeared. Leave it. Sterling's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The nurse froze. Sterling looked at Kensington. My disaster response firm holds a $300 million emergency contract with the city of Seattle. A contract that designates this hospital as our primary trauma facility. A contract I personally authorize every year. He let that land. In 10 minutes, my legal team and the chief medical officer of the armed forces will walk through those doors requesting my full, unredacted medical chart, including the raw imaging data from the ultrasound in Trauma Bay 1. Harris went chalk white. Captain, raw data from portable units is routinely purged due to storage constraints. Do you think I'm a fool? Sterling's gaze moved to Harris and held him there. Do you think I don't recognize a cover-up? He looked at Kensington. This man panicked. He misread my injury and was about to drive a scalpel into my chest while my heart was in tamponade. If Nurse Hastings hadn't physically stopped him, I would be in your morgue. Captain, you were heavily sedated. You may be misremembering. I was dying, Harris. I was not blind. Sterling pointed at Hannah. That nurse did not assault a superior. She relieved an incompetent officer of command to prevent a fatal casualty. Where I come from, we give people medals for that. He looked at Kensington. If Nurse Hastings is not fully reinstated immediately, with a formal apology and a promotion to head surgical trauma nurse, I will pull my contract, move my unit to Seattle General, and personally ensure that every medical board and federal grant committee in this country understands exactly what kind of physician runs your trauma division. He closed his eyes. You have 5 minutes. Dismissed. The door pushed open again before anyone could speak. Dr. Amelia Brooks stood in the frame, trembling but resolute, clutching a small silver USB drive with white-knuckled hands. She kept her eyes off Harris and found Hannah's face. Hannah gave her one slow, steadying nod. It was all Amelia needed. I have something you need to see, she said, stepping forward. Dr. Harris instructed me to alter the operative notes and document a resolved hemothorax. He threatened to fail my residency if I refused. She held up the drive. He also ordered me to wipe the ultrasound machine's local memory. But the machine automatically backs up to the hospital's secure cloud server. I downloaded the raw imaging files before Dr. Harris could access and delete the backup. She looked directly at Kensington. The files show massive pericardial effusion. Cardiac tamponade, exactly as Nurse Hastings diagnosed. There was no hemothorax. If Dr. Harris had inserted that chest tube, Captain Sterling would have died instantly. Nurse Hastings saved his life. I only held the needle. The silence was absolute. Kensington ran the calculation fast. Protect a liability and lose a $300 million contract. Or act and become the hero who saved the city's favorite son. Dr. Harris, Kensington said, his voice turning to ice. Your security badge, pager, and hospital privileges are revoked. Effective immediately. You are terminated. Harris's mouth opened and closed. I am the chief of trauma. I generate millions. You generate lawsuits, Kensington said flatly. Frank, escort Mr. Harris off the premises. If he resists, call the police. Frank, who had spent years watching Harris humiliate the nursing staff, allowed himself a deeply satisfied smile. With pleasure. As Harris was guided out, his arrogance visibly collapsed, Kensington turned to Hannah. Nurse Hastings, on behalf of Seattle Presbyterian, I offer my sincere apology. Your suspension is lifted. We would like to formally offer you the position of head surgical trauma nurse with full back pay. Hannah recognized what Kensington was, a man acting from calculation, not conscience. But the outcome was what mattered. I'll accept, she said. One condition. Dr. Brooks is transferred to my direct supervision for her trauma rotations. No retaliation, ever. Agreed. Absolutely. Kensington nearly sprinted for the door. When the room finally cleared, Amelia exhaled a long, shuddering breath. A few tears of pure released adrenaline slipped down her face. You did well, kid, Sterling rasped from the bed, genuine warmth touching his lips for the first time. That took real courage. Hannah lowered herself into the chair beside him, the adrenaline crash leaving her bone exhausted. The Reaper's shadow, Sterling said softly. Out in the open at last. Hannah looked at her hands. I never wanted this. I know. His voice had gentled. But you can't run from who you are, Hastings. You are a protector, and this hospital needed you exactly as you are. For the first time in years, the weight she had carried began, slowly, tentatively, to lift. 6 months later, Trauma Bay 1 moved with the synchronized precision of a military extraction unit. A multi-vehicle collision had sent a wave of critical patients through the doors, but there was no shouting, no panic, and absolutely no ego. At the center of it stood head surgical trauma nurse Hannah Hastings, calm, commanding, exactly where she belonged. Amelia, she called across the bay. Walk me through your next move. Pelvic binder secured. Fast negative. Initiating massive transfusion protocol. Pre-positioning for emergency pelvic angiography to embolize the bleed, Amelia replied without looking up. Textbook. Go. The fear-based culture Harris had built was gone. Survival rates had climbed steadily since. Harris, meanwhile, faced an expanding malpractice lawsuit and an indefinitely suspended license. As the shift wound down, Hannah heard deliberate footsteps approaching from the corridor. She looked up. Donald Sterling walked toward her, fully healed, out of uniform, dressed in a dark, tailored suit that concealed the landscape of scars beneath it. He moved with the quiet, precise grace of someone who had spent a lifetime being dangerous without announcing it. Captain, Hannah said, setting down her pen. Please tell me you didn't try to subdue another pressurized chemical tank. Sterling laughed, low, warm, and genuine. Keeping my distance from the docks, I came to see you. He glanced around the department with quiet approval. The city's EMS directors can't stop talking about the turnaround here. They say the trauma bay runs like a military extraction operation. I run it the only way I know how. Precision, protocol, and zero tolerance for arrogance. He reached into his jacket and placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on the counter between them. She looked at it. What is this? A different kind of mission. Hannah broke the seal. Her eyes moved across the first paragraph and stopped. Chief Medical Director, Vanguard Disaster Response Group. My private unit, Sterling said. We deploy globally. Earthquakes, structural collapses, extractions in hostile territories with no diplomatic cover. We have the finest operators in the world, but our medical division has never had a true leader. He looked at her steadily. I need someone who doesn't flinch. Someone who can stand down a corrupt commander to protect a patient. A pause. I need the Reaper's shadow. Hannah held the contract. The salary was significant, but that wasn't what was moving through her chest. It was the mission, the scope of it, the chance to take everything the war had forged in her and use it, not in hiding, not behind hospital politics, but at the center of something that mattered. I just rebuilt this department, she said. You did, Sterling agreed. And you built something that can stand without you. Brooks is going to be an outstanding surgeon because of what you gave her. He met her eyes. But you and I both know what you are, Hannah. You are not a person designed for a cage. Hannah looked out across the trauma bay. She watched Amelia guiding a junior nurse through a central line with steady confidence. Sterling was right. The work here was complete. She no longer needed to hide inside it. She uncapped her pen and pulled the contract toward her. When do we deploy? A fierce, certain light ignited behind her green eyes. The light of someone who has finally stopped running. Sterling's smile matched it. Wheels up for Tokyo in 48 hours. Seismic event. Mass casualties. Hannah signed her name in a single, decisive stroke. Then let's go save some lives, Captain. The invisible backbone of Seattle Presbyterian was stepping out of the shadows, not as a ghost, not as a secret, but as exactly who she had always been. The Reaper's shadow, standing between death and the living, and refusing, as she always had, to let death win.